Okay, our last example that we're going to take a look at from this section is going to be example 4. They give us the function f of x equals 12x plus 25. And that's all over square root of 16x squared plus 100x plus 500. And we want to find what are the limits at positive infinity and negative infinity. So we want what are the limits at positive infinity and negative infinity. So let's look at kind of trying to figure stuff out. Let's look at limit as x approaches infinity and see what happens. Since we got an x squared underneath the square root here, I'm going to bring in, need to think about this kind of carefully. I'm going to handle this the other method from example 3b just so we kind of can see it both ways. So x squared underneath the square root is kind of the highest power in the denominator. And we're going to need to bring in a form of one that uses that. So I'm going to bring in a square root of 1 over x squared times a square root of 1 over x squared. Now I should be able to combine those square roots together. See here, and in the top, we'll take a look at the top here in just a second. But let's kind of combine stuff up in the bottom. In the denominator, we can combine those two square roots into a single square root, and this will be just a 1 over x squared, and then this will be 16x squared plus 100x plus 500. In the top, square root of 1 over x squared. Since in the bottom I needed to keep this square root there to combine with the other square root, I didn't simplify this down. But in the top, we should kind of note that, hey, as long as x is positive, this whole bit here is really just the same thing as 1 over x. Because square root of 1 is 1, square root of x squared is x. In this case, x is positive, so we don't have to worry about the square root of x squared, something weird happening. So this gives us back our positive x, and then we can distribute that across the top. So the x's cancel, it leaves us 12, and then we get 25. 25 times 1 over x from this distributing across here. Now downstairs, when we did the distribution now of the 1 over x squared, we get a limit as x approaches infinity of 12 plus 25 times 1 over x. All that over the square root of 16, x squared over x squared cancels, so that's 16. Plus we have 100, 1x up top, 2x down below, so that's a 1 over x. Plus 500, none of the x's cancel, so that's times a 1 over x squared. As x's go to infinity, any of these 1 over x or 1 over x squared terms, they go to 0. So we are left with 12 over the square root of 16, which is 12 over 4, which 12 divided by 4 is 3. So we should end up with 3 for that, and that should agree with what the book says. Now, the problem is whenever we want to say what's going on with x, this was x going to positive infinity, and everything kind of worked out nicely. Let's look at x going to negative infinity. So what about the case when we look at limit as x goes to negative infinity? So we want the limit as x goes to negative infinity of our expression, which our expression was 12x plus 25, all that over the square root of 16x squared plus 100x plus 500. Now, I need to be a little careful with what I do in this case. When I bring this in, I want to still be able to combine it up the same way as I did before. But there's an issue here. X is heading towards negative infinity, which means the x's that we're using are negative. So if I bring in a 1 over the square root of x squared, that's supposed to be kind of in place of just an x, but squaring a negative makes it positive, and then taking the positive square root says that we end up with 1 over a positive thing, when really kind of, well, here, we'll bring it in this way, and then we'll say where the problem is. The problem's going to come whenever we try to, in the top, when we try to like do the step here, where we said, hey, this goes back to 1 over x. That's not really exactly what's going to happen here. Let me think the way to say it. Tell you what, let's bring in well, let's just bring it in this way and see what happens. So we've got this all going on here. In the top, we will we'll distribute this basically to the top and to the bottom, and what's going on here is this right here is really supposed to be kind of 1 over x. No, I'm messing this up. Let me reset it. Let's do this in a couple steps. Okay, so this is what we're trying to find. So sorry, we're just reset what we're trying to do. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to bring in a 1 over x and a 1 over x. And then I need to do a little bit to this form of 1 over x that I'm bringing in. In the bottom, I needed the bottom to have the square root form. And this, we have to be real careful how I do this, because in the top I was a little iffy with it and just kind of said, well, it's positive, I don't need to worry about stuff. So I brought it in as the square root of 1 over x squared. I brought it in as that. And I knew that since we're going to limit as x goes to infinity, x's are positive. And I wouldn't need to worry about this little thing we're worrying about in the negative case. This right here would become 1 over x with no issue. And this one that goes downstairs, nothing weird's happening with it. What's going on here is I need to bring in the 1 over x, and then I need to get the, in the top it's going to work out all nicely. The x's will cancel, we'll be left with the 12, and we'll have plus 25 times 1 over x. What I need to be a little careful with is downstairs when I go to bring in that square root, so I was going to bring it in as the 1 over the square root of x squared, and we should say, well, 1 over, square root cancels the square, so that's the same as 1 over x. And it's almost, it's very close to the same thing as 1 over x, but we have a slight difference of what's going on here. It has to do with the fact that x is negative when we head to negative infinity. If x is negative and you have 1 over x, this right here, this is a negative number, really. This 1 over x here that we brought in, that is actually a negative number. So we really brought in a 1 over a negative number divided by 1 over a negative number, because we're looking at x's heading to negative infinity. The problem is if x is negative, when you square a negative, it becomes positive. And then you take the square root of that, and you get that it's positive. So the negative suddenly became a positive. And that has to do with we're trying to represent the x by squaring and taking a square root. And if x is positive, that's great. They're identical. But if x is negative, we need to put a negative sign out front, because this gets the magnitude right, but for negative x's, the sign will be wrong. So to fix the wrong sign, we got to put a negative out front. And that comes from 1 over x is negative. If we're trying to rewrite 1 over x as 1 over the square root of x squared, that needs to be negative. And then we'll do one more kind of rewriting on it so we can combine it into the square root that's currently there. So we get, this is limit as x approaches negative infinity. To kind of make it easier to see what's going to happen on the denominator, on the bottom of this, I'm going to write this as negative big square root of 1 over x squared. That's the same thing as that. Again, the negative is out there because 1 over x is negative, so whatever I'm using to represent it here algebraically, that has to actually be negative, and since we're squaring the x, then taking the square root, that's going to leave us a positive, which we can't have, so we've got to make sure we get that extra negative there, or else when we get done, our sign will be wrong. So usually the positive stuff, positive infinities are pretty easy. It's just when you're dealing with roots and powers and negative infinities, you have to be a little bit careful because some stuff, like what just happened here, that can occur and that'll be an issue. Basically, if you're looking through the homeworks on these and you're doing the odd number homeworks, if you notice that some of your signs are off, maybe that's a good thing to check first. So I'm going to combine this now. We got our negative, we got a big square root of 1 over x squared times 16x squared plus 100x plus 500. So we're kind of algebraically rearranging stuff still. We get limit as x approaches negative infinity of 12 plus 25 times 1 over x. Oops, what's going on? Okay. Let's see here. And that's all over negative. This is going to distribute. And we get the x squareds will cancel out. So it's negative square root of 16 plus 2x's down below with the 1x up top. The 1 cancels, leaves you a single x down below. We get 100 times 1 over x. Nothing is going to cancel with the x squared here, so we get plus 500 times 1 over x squared. Now we can look at the limit of these as x goes to negative infinity. So all the terms with the 1 over x in them, they all go to 0. And we get 12 over negative square root of 16. Which is 12 over negative 4, which is negative 3. So the limit as we go to negative infinity is actually going to negative 3. And again, where the weirdness kind of came in on this one is we brought in a 1 over x times a 1 over x. And this one right here, this is supposed to represent a negative amount. So when we go to rewrite it as 1 over the square root of x squared, that needs to be a negative amount as well. So the fact that this is negative, when we go to rewrite it in this format here, it needs to remain negative, and that's where this negative sign from this step here is what carries through and makes this negative 3 instead of positive 3. So